10 years ago, my wife walked out on me and left me with 5 kids to raise on my own. I didn't know how I'd make it, but I knew I had to. What happened next changed everything. This is the story of how I turned my life around and the shock my wife faced when she saw who I had become. 10 years ago, my wife walked out the door, leaving me with 5 kids to raise on my own. It wasn't just the heartache of losing her. It was the shock of being abandoned, forced to face a reality where I was now solely responsible for our children's lives. She had her reasons, I'm sure, but they didn't matter to me then. All I could feel was the weight of her absence and the crushing uncertainty that came with it. Suddenly, I was the one who had to be strong. I had to be both mother and father, trying to balance the chaos of everyday life while still keeping some semblance of stability for my kids. The house was louder and emptier, and the days felt longer. But there was no time to wallow. My children needed me, and I couldn't afford to falter. The world around me seemed to crumble, but I had no choice but to step up. Slowly, I learned how to manage everything, emotionally, financially, and practically. There were days when I doubted myself, but I kept going, driven by the love I had for them. Over time, I found strength in the moments when I saw them grow and thrive, despite it all. The first few years were brutal. I juggled work, school runs, doctor visits, and late-night feedings. Every day it felt like I was barely keeping my head above water, struggling to manage it all. There were moments when the weight of it all seemed too much, when I would catch myself at the kitchen table, too tired to move, but knowing I had to push through. My kids needed me, and I couldn't afford to break down. I had to be strong, even when I felt like I was drowning. But slowly I began to adjust. I found routines that worked. Though they weren't always easy, I became more efficient, balancing the chaos of work with the quiet moments of bonding with my children. I learned how to handle the house and the kids, often juggling multiple tasks at once. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I even picked up a few side jobs to help make ends meet, always putting their needs first. Through it all, I began to realize something. There was a new strength within me that I hadn't known before. In many ways, I started to thrive. I had to. My children relied on me, and I couldn't let them down. But there was something else that lingered in the back of my mind, something I couldn't ignore. No matter how well I was managing, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I thought about the way she left, how she walked away without a second glance. I wondered what I had done wrong, what was missing in me that made her leave. Those questions never quite left my mind. I tried to focus on the present, on raising my kids and building a life for us. But the absence of her was always there, hovering just below the surface. I kept going, even as the pain of abandonment lingered. As time passed, I realized that I had built a life on my own terms. I had become more than I ever thought possible. But despite the strength I had found, there was still a part of me that wanted answers, that longed for the family I had lost. In the end, I learned that strength doesn't come from never breaking down. It comes from rising after every fall. The years weren't easy, but they taught me to persevere and to find resilience where I thought there was none. And through it all, my children were my motivation, my reason to keep swimming, no matter how hard it got. Even without her, we built something strong. As the years went on, life became a little easier, a little smoother. The kids grew older, and I found myself more successful in my work. The chaos of the early days started to settle, and I could finally breathe a little. That's when I began to notice changes in myself, changes I couldn't ignore. I was no longer just going through the motions of survival. I was starting to live for myself. I began to achieve things I never thought possible. I started pushing myself in ways I hadn't before, taking on challenges, succeeding where I once would have hesitated. I began to realize that I could do more than just get by. I could thrive. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound by the need to please anyone. I wasn't holding myself back, thinking about what I had lost or what she might have wanted. I was free to be the person I was meant to be, and that freedom opened up a world of opportunities. My sense of identity grew in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't just the man who had been left behind. I wasn't defined by her absence. I was a father who had stepped up, who had made a life for his kids and himself, despite everything that had been thrown his way. With each success, big or small, I could feel myself becoming stronger, more confident, and more assured of who I was. Have you ever had to pick up the pieces after someone left you behind? Or maybe you faced a challenge that seemed impossible at the time, but you overcame it? Drop a comment and share your story. Let's talk about the moments that made us stronger. I wasn't just the guy she'd walked out on anymore. I was a father who made it. The man I had become was no longer tied to the past. He was focused on the present and the future, building something real for myself and my children. And for the first time in a long while, I was proud of what I had accomplished, proud of the life I had created. One day out of the blue, I received a message from her. She was back in town and she wanted to meet. I wasn't sure what to expect, but curiosity got the better of me and I agreed. As I sat at the coffee shop, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them certain. When she walked in, I could see the surprise in her eyes. She looked at me with disbelief. The same man, yet somehow different. The person she had left behind was gone, replaced by someone who had built an entirely new life from the ashes of the past. She hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of what to say, before walking over to the table. I could feel her gaze lingering on me, taking in the changes and the confidence that had grown over the years. The years hadn't just passed. They had transformed me, and it was clear to her. The man who had been broken, the one she'd walked away from, had been rebuilt into someone stronger, someone unrecognizable. But I knew why she was here. It wasn't just curiosity about me, about what I had become. It was more than that. She wanted to know how I had done it, how I had turned things around after she left. What had I done to move on, to rebuild a life without her? She needed the answers, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to give them. I had walked that painful road alone, and now it seemed that she was the one searching for a way forward. When I told her what I'd built, how I'd raised our kids, how successful I had become, how fulfilled I was without her, I could see the shock on her face. She expected to find a broken man, someone who needed her, someone who had failed. Instead, she found a father who had turned hardship into success, a man who had rebuilt his life from the ground up. I didn't hold anything back. I told her everything. The pain of the years without her, the struggles of being alone with the kids, the moments of doubt and fear, and how I had pushed through it all. I spoke about how I had come out the other side stronger, more focused, and more determined than ever. The weight of my words hung in the air, heavy with everything I had been through. The look on her face was a mix of regret and awe. She didn't expect this version of me, and I could see the realization sinking in, that she had underestimated me, that she had walked away from someone who had not only survived but thrived. She had no idea what I had become, and honestly, I wasn't sure she ever would. The man sitting across from her wasn't the one who had loved her so deeply. He was someone new, someone who had found his strength in the wake of her absence. I wasn't angry at her anymore. The years had healed the wounds, and I realized that the best thing she ever did for me was leave. It pushed me to become the man I never knew I could be. In those early years, the pain felt unbearable, but with time, I had grown stronger. I had been forced to stand on my own, to rebuild my life from the ground up, and I had done it. Strangely, her departure had set me free. It had forced me to find my own path. I walked away from that conversation knowing one thing. I had no room for her in my life anymore. The man I had become no longer needed her validation and no longer carried the weight of the past. I had my kids, my accomplishments, and a future that was entirely my own. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. The hurt had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. I had built something real, something stronger than I ever thought possible, and that was enough. I didn't need her in my life to complete me anymore. I was okay with that. I had everything I needed right in front of me. Sometimes life pushes you to your limits, but it's in those moments that we discover who we truly are. I don't regret what happened. I'm proud of what I became. Thanks for following my story. If you've ever had to rebuild your life, remember, you're never as broken as you think.